Welcome to another Animation Friday, and today I thought it would be interesting to briefly address, I think, a very interesting topic and a unique time period within animation. And as you can see by the title, that is World War II and Disney. Now you might be wondering how those two things kind of really tie together. Well, basically during the war, or when World War II started, um, the ability for the Disney studio to maintain a profit from their distribution of their films was and shorts was very slim, considering the fact that since the war started, there weren't a lot of people going out and um, watching films, or even considering distributing films. Uh, and especially since it was a world conflict, this included countries within Asia as well as in Europe. So the studio was lagging during this time period. But Walt Disney sort of combated this by sort of working with the government. And they happened to make contracts with the government, his studio and the government, and that he eventually ended up making sort of instructional kinds of films for the army, basically, and military. Um, and he did this for a consecutive 4 years, so pretty much throughout the entire war. Um, and uh, even and there was also, I think, another big reason to why Walt Disney was motivated to kind of go in this direction. Um, and that was because the people that were within the military during this time were the people that were watching, Walt Disney's characters when they were a child, um, watching the shorts within the 20s and 30s, as well as the some of the full-length feature films that did eventually come out before the war, which were fairly few. I know for sure Snow White and Pinocchio, but I believe um, there was some time before Dumbo was released, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, there was really this time period and break of filmmaking. But he felt like he did sort of owe a debt to these people because they were sort of the generation who made Walt Disney really popular, and um, and they did grow up in a fairly sort of difficult time period, considering the 30s was the Depression era. So I think Walt Disney did feel that there was some genuineness to his efforts, and he was looking beyond just the monetary factor of it. And even then, Disney sometimes didn't make a profit from showcasing their instructional uh, kinds of um, films. So it sort of goes to show that there was this kind of personal connection too. It wasn't primarily for monetary value, although that was the sort of initial reason, considering the fact that the studio really couldn't make films during this time because they wouldn't make a significant amount of money. Um, so, and also there were other famous people as well as other animated studios that did kind of do a similar thing around World War II. For example, I'm sure there are more than just one animated short for Warner Brothers that did sort of feature a World War II sort of theme. Um, but the one that I did manage to find was kind of a little bit uncomfortable because some of these shorts do kind of lean towards propaganda, and I think that's sort of the complaint that people have when it comes to these shorts. But I'm kind of gonna kind of explain my reasoning as to why I don't think they're as bad or as harmful as maybe some people think they are. But basically, a lot of the propaganda that was surrounded during this time, at least the animated shorts that Disney did make, um, were around trying to kind of poke fun at the other side, like make fun of the Japanese, make fun of Hitler. Hitler in particular was, I think, a big one for Disney. Um, and I think they wanted to make this very kind of kind of crazy character out of out of him, even though they do really hint at the sort of kind of underlying and haunting reality in some of their shorts, even though they might be a little bit more, again, centered on propaganda. Um, but basically, regardless, I think they are actually fun to watch. Even if they are propaganda, it's not like I'm gonna be influenced because I know really what happened during World War II. So, but I think also um, the leanings to propaganda, I think, can be due to sort of ignorance too. During this time, we really didn't, at least the United States, really didn't know about the kinds of things that were really going on overseas. I mean, they would only see maybe, you know, uh, updates, and they'll maybe show you a little bit of action that is going on, or they'll show Hitler giving a speech. Um, but they don't show, the horrible atrocities that really happen. And so I think this is why we get this very kind of comedic figure in a lot of these shorts, or we get a very kind of serious, power hungry um, feeling, because that's what was showcased to people. And I can understand sort of the comedic effect, especially with Hitler, considering the fact when Hitler would give his speeches, he always seems so goofy to me. I mean, just the way with his mannerisms and all that. So, again, I think I can understand why there's a little bit of an over exaggeration um, of the things that end up occurring in a lot of these kinds of shorts. Although I'm not saying they're perfect or that they don't have their problems, but regardless, I think they're still entertaining. I mean, they're fun to watch, even if they have kind of these maybe what we would consider today maybe controversial um, topics within them or ideas. Um, and and I think too, um, regardless of you know the propaganda surrounding a lot of these shorts, I think a lot of them still retain some kind of message, that I was trying to get to the public. It wasn't like there wasn't maybe some truth within it, even if it is propaganda, and there's a lot of over exaggeration of it. There's still kind of a semblance of truth to it that doesn't even need to necessarily apply to the war itself. Um, for example, there's one animated short in particular where they discuss emotions and um, how Hitler's ideology was largely based off of emotion and not necessarily rationality or reason. Um, and it was sort of arguing how when people's emotions take over and um, and become part of the person's uh, self, we lose kind of a sense of, I guess, sanity, you could say. And I think there is some sort of truth to that. I mean, I think emotions are important to have, and I think emotions and rationality can kind of blend together and sort of uh, allow us to become better individuals. But at the same time, sometimes emotions can override our rationality and our ability to think um, and come to logical conclusions. Um, and you'll clearly see the showcase within the short. And even though it has that thing attached with, Hitler at the end, all being about emotion and, him being with just emotion, um, the message I think still retains its value because I think that's an important message to get out to people, that not everything should just be based on emotion. Um, but they should sort of kind of work together, emotion and rationality. So that's interesting. Um, there's also another short that involves Donald, out of all people. And it's the one where he wakes up and he basically lives in a Nazi world. And he goes to the Nazi um, uh, work factory to work and basically make shells, um, and other, I think just shells actually, for the military, in particular for the Nazi military. And it's very ridiculous. It's very over the top. It showcases, how it's completely Nazified everywhere. The clock has Nazi symbols all over it. Like the cuckoo clock, like the bird that comes out is a Hitler bird. And then Donald's just like going up and then like hailing his leaders, because they basically showcase the three main Axis powers of Germany, of Japan, and of Italy. So he basically sort of honors them and then goes off to work. And then basically at the end of the short, he wakes up and he's in America. And it's like America everywhere, and there's like stars and stripes, and he's all happy and whatnot. Even though, again, I know it's very over exaggerated. These shorts are not like these these very tame kind of just, oh, look at the cute bunny. No, they're kind of they're just kind of overblown, and again, they don't really reflect reality in the same way that a lot of cartoons don't really reflect reality. But at the same time, I think the short was still bringing up an interesting concept of patriotism, because again, he wakes up in a Nazi world where he worships the leaders, and then he goes to and then he wakes up again in the American sort of world, and everything is all stars and stripes and, oh, so happy, and so I think it's saying something too about the over exaggeration of patriotism, and what that does to I guess you could say people's sanity in a way, because you'll see how kind of Donald has to go through a lot of kind of kooky things throughout the short. But again, at the same time, it's very over exaggerated. Hitler is a very over exaggerated, flamboyant character, and again, a lot of the things I think that people were expressing were a lot of what they actually saw from the speeches. Because if you look at the black and white, and when he's talking and he's speaking, he has this very like really flamboyant way of expressing himself, and so they kind of showcased that and made fun of that within the short. And that's, I think, the only characterizations that they really had to go from back then when it came to Hitler. So they didn't really know him as the evil person that we know of him today, because they were just going through the war. They didn't they didn't see the whole history and the books and all of that stuff that came after the war. They only had to go with what they really saw, in order to make these kinds of shorts. So I can kind of understand why there is this sense of over exaggeration with the characterizations of, in particular, Hitler, and and the whole the whole idea of combating the Nazi power that was so prevalent back then. And they do have some kind of more eerie ones. One in particular stands out to me, where basically the child is sort of indoctrinated, And yes, it is creepy, it is scary, it is a little bit, again, on the propaganda side, like I've said before. I'm not saying that these are dear and true 100% factual or represent anything of reality, but again, it's a cartoon, and um, a lot of uh, a lot of what it showcases, I think, is sort of um, a sort of fear that people had back then of the power that Hitler had, because I think a lot of people that were exposed to Hitler during that time saw his speeches, saw how kind of kooky and crazy he was, and then saw the army and the troops marching, and that's really a lot of what people really ultimately saw from back then. They weren't really exposed on the same level as we are today, because we have all of the history, we have all of the knowledge, the resources and things like that we can turn to. Back then they didn't have anything really, because it was just going on. So I can understand why these kinds of things, kind of ended up sort of forming, and why they kind of took this sort of propagandic angle. Um, and again, I think they really wanted to rally the American people behind this war, and I think there was a lot of support for this war compared to a lot of other wars that have come and gone. Like, this one was probably the only one where you saw people really, really being behind, I guess, the American people in a way. So, and behind the the takedown of the Axis powers. I think that was really behind a lot of Americans' mindsets back then, and I think these shorts were just a means to which that they sort of expressed that kind of a of a idea. Again, it's not to say that the idea was, again, 100% correct, but at the same time, that was the mindset, and that's what they were exposed to. And now that we're exposed to more information, since it's been years and years and years since the war happened, we can know a lot more, and we can kind of look back on it and sort of laugh in a way. And I sort of do laugh in a way with these shorts, because they're just so ridiculous and so, kind of not really true to history. But at the same time, it was trying to bring up the feelings and the thoughts and ideas that were going through a lot of people's minds back then, within the United States in particular. Um, but yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this particular concept. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.